Hello everyone, good evening. I'm going to do a talk now called This Mind is Buddha. So I hope you'll all enjoy it. So this is the basic teaching of what has been called the Zen school of Buddhism. Though the teachings themselves transcend attachment to any religious system, the great adept Bodhidharma is accredited with introducing the Zen form of Buddhism into China, which is called Chan. The words Chan and Zen have the same meaning as the Sanskrit word dhyana, which roughly means meditation. When I read various accounts of Bodhidharma's life, I found quite a bit of conflict. Some said he was a Brahmin, and some said he was of the Kshatriya or warrior caste. But what they all agree upon is his teachings. Now, in the book Buddhism, the Science of Life, by Alice Leighton Cleather and Basil Crump, they mention Bodhidharma and say that besides being a name of the ancient wisdom, from the word Bodhi, wisdom, and Dharma, law, it was also, and this is what they say, also the name of a great Buddhist Arhat, Kshatriya, the son of a king. He was so named by his guru, Panyatara, because of his knowledge of the wisdom religion, and was the 28th Indian and the first Chinese patriarch of Buddhism. He founded the Esoteric school and the Zen mystic sect in China, where he lived about 520 AD, or CE as we say nowadays, at the monastery of Shaolin in Honan. So, end of quote. In legend, it is said that he taught the monks some basic physical exercises, as he thought it unhealthy that they sat around and meditated without any kind of physical exercise at all. And this was said to have later developed into the kung fu that Shaolin is now famous for. I suppose his upbringing as a Kshatriya, which is the warrior caste, would support this. Cleather and Crump go on to say, his name in Chinese is usually abbreviated to Dhammo. It is this Indian sage, this searcher of hearts and scorner of books, who is regarded as the founder in China of the Chan, or contemplative school of Buddhism. You'll not find Buddhism or Buddha in images or books. That was the teaching of the Venerable Dhammo. Look into your own heart. That is where you will find Buddha. That's from Buddhism, the Science of Life, as said by Alice Leighton Cleather and Basil Crump, page 143. Now, I can give a whole talk about Bodhidharma and his adventures, but that would be too much of a digression. His whole teaching can be summarized in the following words from his bloodstream sermon. He says, everything that appears in the three realms comes from the mind. Hence, Buddhas of the past and future teach mind to mind without bothering about definitions. And a student asks, but if they don't define it, what do they mean by mind? And Bodhidharma replies, you ask, that's your mind, I answer. That's my mind. If I had no mind, how could I answer? If you had no mind, how could you ask? That which asks is your mind. Through endless kalpas are long periods of time in Indian mythology and teaching. Throughout endless kalpas without beginning, whatever you do, wherever you are, that's your real mind, without beginning. Whatever you do, wherever you are, that's your real mind. That's your real Buddha. This mind is the Buddha, says the same thing. Beyond this mind, you'll never find another Buddha. To search for enlightenment or nirvana beyond this mind is impossible. The reality of your own self-nature, the absence of cause and effect, is what's meant by mind. Your mind is nirvana. You might think you can find a Buddha or enlightenment somewhere beyond the mind, but such a place doesn't exist. Trying to find a Buddha or enlightenment is like trying to grab space. Space has a name but no form. It's not something you can pick up or put down, and you certainly can't grab it. Beyond mind, you'll never see a Buddha. The Buddha is a product of the mind. Why look for a Buddha beyond this mind? Or beyond concepts? Buddhas of the past and future only talk about this mind. The mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is the mind. Beyond the mind, there's no Buddha, and beyond the Buddha, there's no mind. If you think there is a Buddha beyond this mind, where is he? There's no Buddha beyond the mind, so why envision one? You can't know your real mind as long as you deceive yourself. As long as you're enthralled by a lifeless form, you're not free. If you don't believe me, deceiving yourself won't help. It's not the Buddha's fault. People, though, are deluded. They're unaware that their own mind is the Buddha. Otherwise, they wouldn't look for a Buddha outside the mind. Interesting. It sounds a bit complex, but things will come clear. So let's look for a while at the definition of the mind in Theosophical literature. It is said in the Secret Doctrine that the mind began to incarnate in mankind midway through the third race in this fourth round. As many of you might know, we go through 7 rounds of existence. From the first, we go down, the first 3 is on the descent. We're now in the 4th, and there's 5 races in each, 7 races, sorry, in each round, and we're in the 5th. So we're just slightly going back on the upward, and then there's a 3 on the upward, makes a 7. So before that, man had been a spiritual and physical being. Then the early sub-races of the third race evolved an intermediate race in which the higher Jian Chuans incarnated, Jian Chuans being very high spiritual beings. These were called the sons of will and yoga and represented the full incarnation of the mind principle. These beings had already reached in previous cycles of existence such an exalted state as to be able to perform this function. Again, I could go off in another direction and talk about how this first effort was not entirely successful, but I won't put you through that. Suffice to say that this was the beginning of the incarnation of mind. Quoting now from Basil Crump and Alice Leighton Cleather again, and from the pamphlet called The Secret Doctrine and the Problem and Evolution of Sex, it says, with the entry of manas, or the mind, a third stream of evolution was added to the spiritual and material, thus raising man far above the rest of creation. This stream was the result of the development of intellect, or mind, in previous cycles of evolution, and conferred self-consciousness on the hitherto mindless. So before this, there were spiritual beings, they had spirit and they had physical, but they didn't have intermediate, they didn't have the mind. So they're a completely different kind of being that we can't really conceive of at the moment. And the voice of the silence, which is a mystical work translated by H.P. Blavatsky, which I've mentioned many times, of course, in my talks, and contains teachings from the Mahayana Buddhist tradition and other sources concerning following the Bodhisattva path to benefit humanity in general. And this mentions the fact that the lower aspects of our mind slay the real, and therefore the disciple must slay the slayer. It is also stated in that book that we have to become all thought and yet exile all thoughts from out of our soul. It also says that when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams, when he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer. Then, only then, and not till then, shall he forsake the region of Asat, the false, to come unto the realm of Sat, the true. Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshy eyes be rendered blind to all illusion. Before the soul can hear, the image, man, has to become as deaf to roarings as to whispers, to cries of bellowing elephants as to the silvery buzzing of the golden firefly. We are also told that mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul. In the Key to Theosophy, also by H.P. Blavatsky, whilst enumerating the principles in man, she says of Manas, the mind, that the future state and the karmic destiny of man depend on whether Manas gravitates more downwards to Kama Rupa, the seat of animal passions, or upwards to Buddhi, the spiritual ego. In the latter case, the higher consciousness of the individual spiritual aspirations of mind, Manas, assimilating Buddhi, are absorbed by it and form the ego, which goes into Devachanic bliss. And Devachan is a state that we go into between our lives, or most of us do between our lives. It's where the Christians get their idea of heaven from. But it's not permanent. So the state in which the mind is illumined by Buddhi, or the intuitive part of our being, is known as Manasa Tajasa, which means the illumined mind. And so this brings us back to Bodhidharma and the teachings of the Chan school, or Zen in Japan. Bodhidharma recognized that this illumination of the mind was crucial to any real spiritual progress. But he also realized that what we considered mind were merely conceptions that we had formed. The Diamond Sutra, an early Buddhist teaching, says that if we entertain ideas of being a bodhisattva, Buddhas, etc., mind, etc., we're on the wrong track because we are bogged down in conceptualized views, which, being of the earth and earthly, will bind us the more tightly to the world and all its illusions. William Blake mentions mind-forged manacles in one of his poems, and that is what we create. It also says in the Diamond Sutra that if we should consider ourselves as a bodhisattva, then we are not really one, because a genuine bodhisattva will have transcended conceptual views of what it is to be a bodhisattva, and therefore tie himself down to any of the conceptions formed by men and women who are looking at things from a much more limited viewpoint. Now, this gives us a clue as to the sacrifice made by an adept who chooses to return to the world of words and concepts out of compassion to teach others. The Master K.H. one of the Theosophical Masters, in the Mahatma Letters to an AP Synod, mentions the inability of words to convey the teachings. And it is said in the Secret Doctrine that such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism that the facts which have actually occupied countless generations of initiated seers and prophets to marshal, to set down and to explain in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress are all recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. The flashing gaze of those seers has penetrated into the very kernel of matter and recorded the soul of things, where an ordinary profane, however learned, would have perceived but the external work of form. So the real teachings are beyond words. They're conveyed in symbols and images and symbols, but we even have to go beyond those. Even those are just pointers. So this is the state of mind that the Chan and Zen focus upon, to transcend the conceptual views that we have and are always binding and don't lead us to any real understanding. H.P. Blavatsky says, this mode of thinking is what the Indians call Jnana Yoga. As one progresses in Jnana Yoga, one finds conceptions arising, which though one is conscious of them, one cannot express nor yet formulate into any sort of mental picture. As time goes on, these conceptions will form into mental pictures. This is a time to be on guard and refuse to be deluded with the idea that the newfound and wonderful pictures must represent reality. They do not. As one works on, one finds the once admired picture growing dull and unsatisfying, and finally fading out or being thrown away. This is another danger point, because for the moment one is left in a void without any conception to support one, and one may be tempted to revive the cast-off picture for want of a better one to cling to. The true student will, however, work on unconcerned, and presently further formless gleams come, which again in time give rise to a larger and more beautiful picture than the last. But the learner will now know that no picture will ever represent the truth. No picture will ever represent the truth. This last splendid picture will grow dull and fade like the others. And so the process goes on, until at last the mind and its pictures are transcended, and the learner enters and dwells in the world of no form, but of which all forms are narrowed reflections. So the teachings of Bodhidharma took hold in China and spread in time to Korea and Japan, and other countries forming part of what is known as the Mahayana school, or Great School of Buddhism, or that school that is concerned mainly with the helping of humanity, whereas the Hinayana, or Theravada, or Small School, is concerned with individual salvation. And this centered around places like Sri Lanka, Burma, or Myanmar, as it's called now, and other places. But the true Chan followers would not identify themselves with any religion, as religions are again limiting and dogmatic. In China, the three great systems of thought, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, have had several golden ages when they all united and gave a unique flavour to each other and produced transcendent schools of thought and practice. Bankei, a Japanese Zen Buddhist who I've mentioned in earlier talks, from the 17th century AD, is one of my favourite exponents of this mind is Buddha school. He taught that we don't have to try to become Buddha, but we just have to remain Buddha. The word Buddha means enlightened, so we mustn't confuse it with any individual teacher. We are already in an enlightened state, but we have allowed false minds, the mind of greed, the mind of anger, the mind of lust, the mind of its separateness, to block out our clear vision of who we truly are. He would say when lecturing that if a bird sang outside whilst we were listening to the speaker, that we would all instantly know that it was a bird. Whether we were male or female or young or old, we don't have to make any conscious effort to know that. We don't think that's a bird singing. He says that this shows the presence of the unborn Buddha mind, which works despite our reasoning. So, I mean, if you want to know more about that, look at my talk on Bankei. I once read in a Theosophical book, I can't remember which actually, that we should place trust in the same power that helped us to walk as children and to talk. We didn't think consciously how to do those things. They came naturally. This is on a basic level, but Bankei was getting at the same thing. It is put in another way in the book, The Light on the Path, transcribed by Mabel Collins, where she says, "Stand aside in the coming battle, and though thou fightest, be not thou the warrior. Look for the warrior and let him fight in thee. Take his orders for battle and obey them. Obey him not as though he were a general, but as though he were thyself. And his spoken words were the utterance of thy secret desires. For he is thyself, yet infinitely wiser and stronger than thyself. Look for him, else in the fever and hurry of the fight thou mayst pass him, and he will not know thee unless thou knowest him. If thy cry meet his listening ear, then will he fight in thee and fill the dull void within. And if this is so, then canst thou go through the fight cool and unwearied, standing aside and letting him battle for thee. Then it will be impossible for thee to strike one blow amiss. If thou look not for him, if thou pass him by, then there is no safeguard for thee. Thy brain will reel, thy heart grow uncertain, and in the dust of the battlefield thy sight and senses will fail, and thou wilt not know thy friends from thy enemies. He is thyself, yet thou art but finite and liable to error. He is eternal and is sure. He is eternal truth. When once he has entered thee and become thy warrior, he will never utterly desert thee. And at the day of the great peace, he'll become one with thee. So this is the same idea, but put in more grandiose language. It means putting trust in the higher self, your own higher self, and knowing that the reasoning of the lower mind can easily lead us astray. Words in books, etc., are always capable of being misunderstood, unless we can bring our intuition to bear. We are always in danger of being led astray. What's it all about is becoming natural, becoming what we are rather than what the world has made us. Most of the religions, sciences, and philosophies of the world are based upon a misunderstanding of our true nature, and therefore hamper us from seeing clearly. This seeing can only be done by the individual. Until then, it is like someone trying to describe something new to a person with eyes closed. They're not able to form a true conception, but their mind creates images of what it looks like. But until they open their eyes, they won't know what it really looks like. The same with taste. How can you describe the taste of anything through words? Unless you pop it into your mouth, you can't really know. The same with spiritual experiences, only more so. You can't convey it in words or images. You can only point the way. Again, it says in the voice of the silence, prepare thyself, thou wilt have to travel alone. The teacher can but point the way. The path is one for all. The means to reach the goal must vary with the pilgrims. As Zen teaching says, 1,000 monks, 1,000 ways. And in the voice of silence, it says we must proceed by self-induced and self-devised efforts. The mind that we have that seems to be separate and limited is in fact the universal mind, suffering under the illusion of separateness. We have within us the strength and potency of the universal mind. If you like, our seemingly little minds can become boundless. There's no limit to expansion, to the expansion of our mentality. We have a mind to embrace the universe, which is another saying from Theosophical teaching. This is why our mind is indeed Buddha or enlightened. This is the idea that the esoteric Buddhist schools and the esoteric schools of other traditions try to get across and try to get us to experience by various methods. But methods can become restricting. Damodar Kemavalanka, an Indian theosophist from the early days, who is said to have been called by the masters to the Himalayas, said in an article on contemplation that we should adopt a meditative state of mind 24 hours a day, and it should be a constant straining to live in the divine. He says that if we meditate just for a couple of hours in the morning and then forget it for the rest of the day, that does no good whatsoever, as the process scientifically is to eject from our being negative atoms, and attract only those conducive to our spiritual life. And that process has to be carried on constantly. Bankei said that the koans, which are stories, dialogues, questions, or statements in the history and lore of Chan or Zen Buddhism, generally containing aspects that are inaccessible to rational understanding, yet may be accessible to intuition, were designed by a certain teacher to instruct a certain pupil at a certain stage of his training. But now people just tend to imitate them. When the old Zen masters did it in a spontaneous way, what the old Zen masters did in a spontaneous way due to their higher psychic vision, modern teachers just do as a habit or a ritual. Same thing in the church. When the priests give, or vicars give sermons, or ministers. Bankei also said that we should make our mind like a mirror. A mirror reflects everything that comes its way without getting involved. So we should not try to suppress thoughts, which makes matters worse, but just let them come, but not follow them or become involved. In that way, they will die out due to lack of fuel. When the mind is calm and empty like the sky, it is then capable of becoming illumined and at one with the universal mind. The mind then becomes Buddha. Of course, when we are, Damodar Mavalanka says we must meditate 24 hours a day, doesn't mean that we should not go about our daily business. He means we should always have this at the back of our mind, this idea of the universal mind at the back of our mind all the time as we go about our day-to-day activities. The Theosophical masters again say, it is upon the serene and placid surface of the unruffled mind that the visions gathered from the invisible find a representation in the visible world. It is upon the serene and placid surface of the unruffled mind that the visions gathered from the invisible find a representation in the visible world. So there are many ways to do this. The secret of the golden flower tells us how to turn the mind around from an involvement with the things of the world towards the spiritual. So from the ordinary mind, it becomes the celestial mind, which is identical with the illumined mind, or Manasa Taijasa, mentioned earlier. It also mentions the process of tuning the mind and breath. If the breathing is regular and silent, the mind is calm. And also if the mind is calm, the breathing is steady and regular. So we need to tune the breathing and the mind. There's a lot more to be said about this. Now, this is just a short talk. I can only give a brief overview, and just this book would require a series of lectures. It also says in The Secret of the Golden Flower that we have to avoid two things when meditating: oblivion and distraction. We must not become oblivious when we're meditating. We must remain very aware inwardly, nor must we become distracted. Those are very two important things, not to become oblivious or distracted. So as I said earlier, Bankei says that we should try to remain in this unborn Buddha mind and not exchange it for a mind of lust, anger, etc., which are false man-made minds. So we have to remain in our original minds. I find this a very good practical exercise. If we feel ourselves giving into anger or lust or jealousy, greed, etc., think, this is not my original mind, and try to settle in that original mind. It's all a matter of allowing ourselves to be what one is. Writing in books, etc., can never contain the truth. They can only convey what is known in the East as Samvriti Satya, or relative truths. Paramartha Satya, or absolute truth, we can only find in our very own hearts, our very own beings. So we can always check ourselves when we feel that we are giving in to something not worthy of the highest in us. Bankei again says that we have to try to comprehend the preciousness of the unborn mind and realize what a waste it is to squander our thoughts on trivial states of mind. These will not help to break down the wall of illusion that prevents us from becoming what we always are, but they are constantly hindering us. This is the highly practical stance the Zen teachings took in order to get rid of all the intellectual jugglery that might do more good than bad. In the end, it is not about words, which are man-made symbols designed to convey certain impressions to the mind, but about the truth of what we really are. And that is of the utmost importance. Zen calls it the great matter, which should occupy all our time. Bodhidharma also once said that the intellect would eventually poison the soul. Why is this? Because the intellect is a raft needed to cross the river of conceptions. But once across a river, a raft then becomes a burden. In the same way, the intellect serves a purpose. When it is served, when it has served the purpose, it becomes a burden. It is the same as said earlier regarding the Bowen notes, when HPB said that images grow dull and fade and are replaced in time by higher images and conceptions, and that when we reach a plateau, we may be tempted to revise worn-out images. Instead, we need to work through all images to the realm of no form. This is the same as the Diamond Sutra again, in Buddhism, telling us to transcend all ideas and concepts of Buddhahood or Bodhisattva-ship at a certain stage of our journey. Otherwise, these concepts prevent us from moving any further and will limit our perception of the truth. Even such concepts as are Maya, their illusion in the end. H.P. Blavatsky in the Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, page 31, says, Maya is the perceptive faculty of every ego, which considers itself a unit separate from and independent of the one infinite and eternal Sat, or beingness. Sat is reality, ultimate reality. So the great diheresy of separateness is the root cause of the existence of the world as it is now, as I mentioned many times in my talks. It's a mind-created world based on misconceptions of who and what we really are. The lower mind has indeed slain the real. The mind is certainly more than a computer that gathers facts and regurgitates them. It has the power to embrace the universe. And as the voice of the silence tells us, our mind can become like a becalmed and boundless ocean, spread out into shoreless space. Our minds become like a becalmed and boundless ocean, spread out into shoreless space. The Chan Zen masters, and indeed masters in Taoism, Confucianism, Vedantism, and Sufism, and even some Gnosticism, had realized that this was the essence of their practical teaching. And some even taught that idea exclusively, realizing that until one achieved Manasa Tajasa, the illumined mind, that no real understanding of the teachings was possible. The masters again confirmed this in letter 49 of the Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinnott, where they say, the occult science is not one in which secrets can be communicated of a sudden by a written or even verbal communication. If so, all the brothers should have to do would be to publish a handbook of the art, which might be taught in schools as grammar is. It is the common mistake of people that we willingly wrap ourselves and our powers in mystery, that we wish to keep our knowledge to ourselves and our powers in mystery, that we wish to keep our knowledge to ourselves and of our own will refuse wantonly and deliberately to communicate it. The truth is that till the neophyte attains to the conditions necessary for that degree of illumination to which and for which he or she is entitled and fitted, most, if not all of the secrets are incommunicable. The receptivity must be equal to the desire to instruct. The illumination must come from within. The illumination must come from within. Till then, no hocus pocus of incantations or mummery of appliances, no metaphysical lectures or discussions, no self-imposed penance can give it. All these are but means to an end, and all we can do is to direct the use of such means as have been empirically found by the experience of ages to conduce to the required objects. And this was and has been no secret for thousands of years. Fasting, meditation, chastity of thought, word and deed, silence for certain periods of time to enable nature herself to speak to him who comes to her for information, government of the animal passions and impulses, utter unselfishness of intention, the use of certain incense and fumigations for physiological purposes have been published as the means since the days of Plato and Iamblichus in the West, and since the far earlier times of our Indian rishis. How these must be complied with to suit each individual temperament is, of course, a matter for his own experience and the watchful care of his tutor or guru, or it could be the higher divine self. The methods mentioned here are used by practitioners of most spiritual disciplines. The danger is when the lower mind steps in and transforms these aids on the path into mere rituals or habits. Then they become sterile. The spiritual life has to be kept spontaneous, alive, and open. We have to be careful not to partition the mind too much and not to lose sight of the fact that we all share one mind, the universal mind, the unborn Buddha mind. This realization will gradually wean us from the idea that we are separate from everyone else and help us to an understanding of universal brotherhood and compassion that is not based on social or political considerations, that a house is built on sand, but a comprehension that once the veils are removed, we'll see that the whole journey is an alchemy of the mind, a transformation, illumination, and eventually a transcendence. Bodhidharma saw this clearly when he said so many centuries ago, "This mind is Buddha." Thank you very much for listening. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. And see you again very soon.